The drone feed showed 460 Americans dying in real time, and Chief Petty Officer Yara Okonkwo was ordered to watch without lifting a finger. She stood in the operations center at Forward Operating Base Chapman, her hand frozen over the radio console, as the thermal imaging painted the massacre in shades of white and gray. SEAL Battalion Foxtrot had entered the compound network 17 minutes ago, expecting a routine high-value target extraction. Now they were trapped in a kill box that someone had spent months designing. Yara's eyes tracked the chaos unfolding 2,000 meters below the surveillance drone. Explosions had collapsed the primary structure, sealing the main entrance. Secondary blasts had taken out the emergency exits. The enemy fighters who emerged from hidden positions moved with the precision of men who had rehearsed this exact scenario dozens of times. This was not an ambush. This was an execution. She keyed her radio. Operations, this is Overwatch. I have visual on Foxtrot. They are pinned in the northeast quadrant. I count approximately 200 enemy combatants converging on their position, requesting immediate authorization to scramble QRF. The response came back cold and immediate. Negative, Overwatch. Hold position. Do not engage. Yara felt her jaw tighten. Around her, the operations center hummed with activity that suddenly felt obscene. Analysts tracked data streams. Communications officers monitored frequencies. Everyone performed their duties with professional detachment, while 460 SEALs fought for their lives on the screens above them. She tried again. Operations, Foxtrot is taking heavy casualties. I have identified a potential extraction route through the southern ridge. If we move now, we can establish a corridor before the enemy consolidates. The door to the operations center opened before anyone could respond. Rear Admiral Vincent Crowe entered with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own judgment. He was 58 years old, silver-haired, and possessed the kind of calm that came from decades of making decisions that killed people. He surveyed the room, noted the drone feeds, and walked directly to the command station. "What is the status of Foxtrot?" he asked. His voice carried no urgency. The senior watch officer answered. "Compound collapse has trapped the battalion in a tunnel network, Admiral. Enemy forces are establishing a perimeter. Communications are being jammed. We estimate they have approximately 4 hours of ammunition at current engagement rates." Crowe studied the feeds for a long moment. Yara watched him watching her brothers and sisters die. She waited for the order that would send help. She waited for the rage that any decent human being would feel at this moment. Crowe turned to face the room. "This situation is now classified as beyond recovery parameters. All assets will stand down and await further instructions. There will be no rescue operation." The words hit Yara like a physical blow. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Admiral, with respect, I can see viable options on this feed. If we coordinate air support with a ground insertion through the southern approach, we can break through their perimeter before they finish consolidating." Crowe looked at her for the first time. His expression was not angry. It was not dismissive. It was simply empty of any recognition that her opinion mattered. "Chief Okonkwo," he said, reading her name tape. "I understand your concern for your fellow operators. But this situation involves factors beyond your clearance level. The decision has been made. For 160 men," Yara said. The words came out harder than she intended. "We're going to let 460 Americans die without even trying. We are going to follow protocol," Crowe said. "As you have always done, Chief. I have read your file. 16 years of exemplary service. Not a single deviation from orders. That is why you will stand down now and trust that your commanders see a bigger picture than you do." He turned away from her, dismissing her existence as completely as he had dismissed the lives on that screen. Yara stood motionless, her hands trembling at her sides, as the Admiral began issuing orders to lock down all communications regarding Foxtrot. The enemy broadcast came through 40 minutes later on an open frequency, cutting through the jammed channels with deliberate clarity. The voice was calm, educated, almost gentle. To the American commanders monitoring this frequency, it said, "You have 72 hours. In 72 hours, The world will watch your soldiers die. This is not negotiable. This is not a demand. This is simply what will happen. Yara closed her eyes. She knew that voice. She had studied it for 18 months across 3 different deployments. She had tracked the man behind it through 6 countries and 14 failed operations. The intelligence community called him the architect because every trap he built was a masterpiece of planning and patience. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone serving overseas right now. She opened her eyes and looked at the screen where 460 SEALs were settling in for a siege they could not survive. Somewhere among those thermal signatures was Lieutenant Commander Declan Vance, the man who had pulled her out of a burning vehicle in Mosul 4 years ago, the man who had told her that protocol meant nothing if it did not protect the people who followed it. The architect had finally built his masterpiece, and Yara was the only person in this room who understood exactly how his mind worked. The memory came without warning, as it always did when death was close. Yara was 12 years old again, standing in the doorway of her father's study in Lagos, watching him press the radio to his ear. Colonel Emeka Okonkwo, Nigerian Army, a man who had never once raised his voice to his daughter, sat perfectly still as the screaming came through the speaker. She did not understand the words then, but she understood the silence that followed. She understood the way her father set down the radio and placed his hands flat on the desk and did not move for a very long time. 3 days later, she learned that 200 civilians had been massacred in a village her father's unit could have reached in 40 minutes. He had received the order to stand down. He had obeyed. 6 months after that, the men who gave that order decided he knew too much about why they gave it. They executed him in front of his family and called it justice. Yara forced the memory back into the locked room where she kept it. She was not 12 years old. She was not powerless. She was a chief petty officer in the most elite special operations force on Earth, and she had 67 hours to find a way to do what her father could not. The operations center had emptied after Admiral Crow departed. Only the night watch remained, monitoring feeds that command had already written off as historical record. Yara stayed at her terminal, pulling up everything she had ever compiled on the architect. His real name was unknown. His nationality was disputed. What was certain was his methodology, a pattern so consistent it had become his signature. He never attacked without preparation. He never prepared without redundancy. And he never built a trap without leaving himself an escape route. She studied the compound layout captured by satellite imagery over the past 6 months. The tunnel network where Foxtrot was trapped had existed for decades, a remnant of Soviet-era construction expanded by subsequent occupants. The architect had not stumbled onto this location. He had selected it specifically because it offered exactly one viable defensive position for a large force, and that position was surrounded by terrain that favored the attacker. But there was something else. Yara pulled up thermal imaging from the past 72 hours and began layering the enemy patrol patterns. The architect was methodical. His men moved on precise schedules, rotating positions at exact intervals. It was his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Predictability meant efficiency. It also meant vulnerability to anyone patient enough to map the gaps. She found it at 0317. Every 6 hours, there was a 14-minute window where the southern perimeter coverage overlapped imperfectly. A single operator moving at speed could cover 400 meters of exposed ground during that window. It was not much. It was not a rescue plan, but it was a crack in the wall. Chief Okonkwo. Yara turned to find Senior Chief Petty Officer Tobias Mwangi standing behind her. He was 41 years old, Kenyan by birth, American by naturalization, and the only person at Chapman who had known her longer than 5 years. He had been her instructor at the sniper school. He had recommended her for DevGru. He was the only person alive who knew about her father. "You should be resting," he said. His voice was gentle, but his eyes were already reading her screen. Or, "You should be doing whatever this is somewhere that does not have security cameras recording everything you access." Yara did not look away from her data. "I am documenting intelligence for the after-action review." Standard protocol. Mwangi pulled a chair beside her and sat down heavily. He was a large man, thick through the shoulders, with hands that seemed too big for the delicate work of precision shooting. Those hands had steadied her rifle the first time she qualified at 1,500 meters. They had gripped her shoulder at her father's memorial service when she finally broke down. Now they rested on his knees as he studied her face with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that silence extracted more truth than questions. "I recognize him on the feed," Yara said finally. "Lieutenant Commander Vance. He transferred to Foxtrot 8 months ago." Mwangi nodded slowly. "The one from Mosul. He carried me 400 meters with a collapsed lung and 2 bullets in his vest." She kept her voice flat, professional, because anything else would crack the control she needed. "He told me that day that protocol existed to save lives, not to make death administratively convenient. I do not think he expected to test that theory from the other side." Mwangi was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Crow has already classified this as a loss. The official position is that rescue is impossible within the operational window. Anyone who challenges that assessment will be relieved of duty and confined pending psychiatric evaluation. I'm not challenging anything. I am following protocol. I am requesting a reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence on enemy positions and capabilities. It is well within my authority as senior sniper on station." Mwangi's eyes narrowed. "Reconnaissance. Standard operational procedure. I go out, I observe, I report back. Everything by the book. And if your reconnaissance happens to identify actionable opportunities that were not visible from drone surveillance, then I document those opportunities and submit them through proper channels." Yara finally turned to face him. "I am not asking you to help me, Senior Chief. I am asking you to not stop me." Mwangi reached into his pocket and withdrew a small radio, different from standard issue, older and heavier. He pressed it into her hand. "Encrypted frequency. Only I can monitor it." He held her gaze. "I'm not helping you, Chief Okonkwo. I am simply ensuring that proper communication channels remain open during your authorized reconnaissance mission." Yara closed her fingers around the radio. It was warm from his pocket. It was the first thing that had felt real since she watched 460 men start dying. She filed the reconnaissance request through official channels at 0400. It was approved without review at 0412. Admiral Crow never even saw it. He had already moved on to protecting whatever secret was worth more than 460 American lives. Yara was collecting her gear when Master Chief Petty Officer Rosalie Dunn found her in the armory. Dunn was 45 years old, the highest-ranking enlisted woman in the SEAL community, and she had a reputation for knowing everything that happened at Chapman before it happened. "I heard your request was approved," Dunn said. She leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed. "I also heard you have a plan. Not the reconnaissance plan, the real one." Yara did not stop checking her equipment. "I do not know what you mean, Master Chief." Dunn smiled without warmth. "I defied orders once. Lost everything. Court-martial, career destruction, the whole show. Then I got it all back. Want to know how?" Yara finally looked up. "I succeeded," Dunn said. "The only difference between a traitor and a hero is whether you win." Dunn did not move from the doorway. She watched Yara load magazines with the calm attention of someone who had seen this exact moment play out before, perhaps in a mirror, perhaps in a memory she had spent years trying to forget. "Tell me what happened," Yara said. She did not stop her preparations, but her hands slowed enough to listen. Dunn was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped into the armory and closed the door behind her. "Kandahar," she said. 11 years ago, we had a network of Afghan interpreters who had been working with our teams for years. Good people, loyal people, families who trusted us because we promised them protection. Then the order came down to evacuate the province. The interpreters were not on the manifest. Too complicated, too expensive, too politically inconvenient to extract foreign nationals when the cameras were watching." Yara looked up. "What did you do?" "I stole a helicopter." Dunn said it like she was describing a trip to the grocery store. "Flew it into a hot zone with no authorization, no support, and no plan beyond the absolute certainty that I was not going to let 36 people die because someone in Washington decided they were not worth the paperwork. And you succeeded. Barely. Lost the helicopter on extraction. Took a bullet through my shoulder. Spent 9 months in legal limbo while they decided whether to give me a medal or a cell. Dunn's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. The only reason I am standing here instead of rotting in Leavenworth is because those 36 interpreters had families, and those families talked to reporters, and those reporters made it very difficult for the brass to court-martial someone the public had decided was a hero. Yara absorbed this. 460 SEALs have families too. They do. And right now, those families have no idea their sons and daughters have been written off as acceptable losses. Dunn moved closer, lowering her voice even though they were alone. I'm not going to help you, Chief. I cannot. I am too visible, too tracked, too obvious. But I can tell you what I learned the hard way. If you're going to break the rules, you need to break them so completely that the only options left are to celebrate you or admit the rules were wrong. Half measures get you killed or imprisoned. Full commitment gets you a statue or a grave. There is no middle ground. Yara finished loading her final magazine and secured it in her vest. I am not planning to break any rules, Master Chief. I am conducting authorized reconnaissance. Dunn smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. Of course you are. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small device, no larger than a coin. Tracking beacon. Encrypted frequency that only I can access. You get into trouble out there, you activate this, and I will know exactly where you are. What I do with that information will depend entirely on how much trouble you find. Yara took the beacon and slipped it into her vest pocket beside her father's dog tags. She had carried those tags for 22 years without fully understanding why. They were not a memorial. They were a reminder. A reminder that following orders was not the same as doing right. A reminder that her father had made a choice, and that choice had destroyed him, and that she had spent her entire adult life trying to prove she was different by never making any choice at all. 67 hours, she said. That is how long until they start executing hostages. Then you had better move fast. Dunn stepped back and opened the armory door. And Chief, when this is over one way or another, I want you to know that some of us see what you're doing. Some of us remember what it felt like to choose people over protocol. Yara gathered her gear and walked out into the pre-dawn darkness of Forward Operating Base Chapman. The mountains rose black against the sky, just beginning to lighten at the edges. Somewhere beyond those peaks, 460 Americans were waiting for a rescue that their own command had declared impossible. Somewhere in those valleys, the architect was preparing his stage for a massacre that would be broadcast to the world. She made her way to the eastern gate where Mwangi was waiting beside a dusty Land Cruiser. He had changed into civilian clothes, nondescript and forgettable, the uniform of someone who did not want to be remembered. "Vehicle will get you to the insertion point," he said. "After that, you are on foot. 14 kilometers to the first overwatch position I identify from satellite imagery. You should reach it by nightfall if you maintain pace." Yara loaded her equipment into the vehicle. "And if Crow asks where I am, you are conducting authorized reconnaissance in Grid Square 774. Communications blackout is standard procedure for solo operations in hostile territory. He will not ask. He has already forgotten you exist." Mwangi paused. "That is both your advantage and your danger. No one is coming to help you because no one is watching." "I know." Yara climbed into the driver's seat and looked at her mentor through the open window. "If I do not come back, make sure the intelligence I gathered gets to someone who will use it. Not Crow. Someone real. If you do not come back, I will make sure the whole world knows why." Mwangi stepped back from the vehicle. "Go bring our people home, Chief." Yara drove east as the sun broke over the mountains. The road deteriorated within the first hour, paved surface giving way to gravel, gravel giving way to dirt, dirt giving way to barely visible tracks carved by generations of shepherds and smugglers. She abandoned the vehicle at a predetermined point and continued on foot, her SR-25 sniper rifle slung across her back, her pack loaded with 72 hours of supplies that she hoped she would not need. The terrain was brutal. Afghanistan did not forgive weakness or hesitation. Every step required attention. Every shadow could hide an enemy. She moved through the landscape like water, flowing around obstacles rather than confronting them, conserving energy for the challenges ahead. By midday, she had covered 8 kilometers. She paused in a narrow ravine to hydrate and review her mental map of the area. The compound where Foxtrot was trapped lay another 6 kilometers to the northeast. The architect's patrol patterns suggested she could approach from the south without detection if she timed her movement to the gaps she had identified. She was checking her equipment when she heard the sound. Voices. Close. Speaking a language she recognized from 18 months of hunting their leader. Yara pressed herself against the ravine wall and controlled her breathing. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see them. For fighters, armed with AK-47s, moving along a path that would bring them within 15 meters of her position. They were not searching. They were patrolling. Routine. Predictable. Exactly as the architect had trained them. She had 2 choices. Engage and risk alerting every enemy unit in the valley. Or wait and pray they passed without noticing her. The first fighter stopped directly above her hiding position. He said something to his companions that made them laugh. Then he unslung his rifle and began scanning the ravine below. Yara stopped breathing. The fighter above her was close enough that she could see the scratches on his rifle stock, the dust caked into the creases of his boots, the small scar that ran along his jawline. He swept his gaze across the ravine floor with the casual attention of a man who had performed this same scan 1,000 times and never found anything. His eyes passed over her position without pausing. One of the other fighters called out impatiently. The man above her responded with an irritated gesture and turned away. Within 30 seconds, all 4 had continued along the path, their voices fading into the mountain silence. Yara remained motionless for another 5 minutes. She had learned patience in places far worse than this ravine. She had learned that the moment you believed danger had passed was often the moment it returned. Only when she was absolutely certain the patrol was gone did she allow herself to breathe normally again. She checked her watch. 58 hours until the execution deadline. She had lost time hiding from the patrol, time she could not afford to waste. She adjusted her pack and continued northeast, moving faster now, accepting greater risk in exchange for speed. The first Overwatch position Mwangi had identified appeared as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. It was a shallow depression on a rocky ridge, invisible from below, with clear sight lines to the compound network where Foxtrot was trapped. Yara settled into the position and assembled her spotting scope with practiced efficiency. What she saw through the lens confirmed her worst fears and her faintest hopes simultaneously. The compound was surrounded. She counted over 200 enemy fighters distributed across fortified positions that had clearly been prepared weeks in advance. Heavy weapons emplacements covered every approach. Communication antennas suggested coordination with forces beyond the immediate area. The architect had not simply set a trap. He had built a fortress around it. But inside that fortress, Battalion Foxtrot was still fighting. Through her scope, Yara could see the SEALs had established defensive positions within the collapsed tunnel network. They had fortified the viable entrances, created overlapping fields of fire, and organized their wounded in a protected central area. They were conserving ammunition, engaging only when necessary, doing everything right. They were also completely surrounded with no prospect of resupply and no knowledge that their own command had abandoned them. She adjusted her scope and searched for familiar faces. It took her nearly 20 minutes, but she found him. Lieutenant Commander Declan Vance was moving between positions, checking on his men, adjusting defenses, projecting the calm confidence that leaders needed to project when everything was falling apart. He looked older than she remembered, tired, but unbroken. Yara pulled out her encrypted radio and keyed the frequency Mwangi had given her. Homestead, this is Wanderer. I have eyes on the objective. Request status update on any changes to operational posture. Mwangi's voice came back scratchy but clear. Wanderer, Homestead. No changes. Official position remains unchanged. Be advised, Command has noted your communication blackout and is not asking questions. You remain invisible. Understood. Wander out. She switched frequencies to monitor enemy communications. The architect's forces were professional, but they were also confident. Confident men talked more than they should. Within an hour, she had confirmed patrol rotation schedules, identified the location of the command post, and learned that the architect himself was expected to arrive the following morning to personally oversee the final preparations. He was coming to watch his masterpiece completed. He was coming to savor the deaths of 460 Americans, and he had no idea that someone was watching him in return. Yara began planning. A solo rescue was impossible. She had known that from the beginning. 460 men could not be extracted by one operator, no matter how skilled. But she was not here to extract them. She was here to create an opportunity that others could exploit. The architect was the key. His organization depended on his planning, his methodology, his personal authority. If she eliminated him and his senior officers, the enemy force would be decapitated. Command structures would collapse. Patrol rotations would falter. In the chaos, Foxtrot might be able to break out. Or, at the very least, they might survive long enough for someone at Chapman to grow a conscience. She studied the command post through her scope. It was positioned on elevated ground behind the main perimeter, protected by multiple layers of security. The architect was cautious. He never exposed himself unnecessarily. Getting a clean shot would require her to move much closer than her current position allowed. But she had identified something else. A communications relay station on a ridge between her position and the compound. It controlled the drone surveillance that monitored the surrounding mountains. If she destroyed it, the architect would lose his eyes in exactly the sector she needed to approach through. Yara checked her ammunition. 40 rounds for the SR-25. 60 rounds for her sidearm. 2 fragmentation grenades. 1 block of C4 with remote detonator that she had liberated from the Chapman Armory without authorization. It was not enough for a war. It might be enough for a miracle. She waited until full darkness before moving. The communication station was 3 kilometers east, manned by a rotating crew of 3 operators. She covered the distance in 90 minutes, navigating by starlight and memory, avoiding the patrol routes she had mapped from intercepted radio traffic. The station was exactly where satellite imagery had promised. A small concrete structure with a generator humming beside it, and a forest of antennas reaching toward the sky. 2 guards stood outside, their attention focused on the valley below rather than the mountain above. The 3rd operator was inside, his silhouette visible through a grimy window. Yara settled into position 200 meters out and studied the target through her scope. The guards were relaxed, bored. They had been watching empty mountains for weeks and had stopped believing the mountains might watch back. She controlled her breathing and placed the crosshairs on the 1st guard. Then she shifted to the 2nd, then to the operator visible through the window. 3 targets, 3 shots. She would have perhaps 4 seconds between the first shot and the moment the 3rd target realized he was in danger. She thought about her father. She thought about the order he had followed and the people who died because he followed it. She thought about protocol and duty and the terrible space between what was legal and what was right. Then she stopped thinking and started shooting. The 1st guard dropped before the sound of the shot reached him. The 2nd guard turned toward his falling companion, confusion just beginning to register on his face, and then he dropped too. The operator inside the station had exactly 2 seconds to understand that something was wrong before the 3rd round punched through the window and ended his understanding permanently. Yara was moving before the last body hit the ground. She crossed the 200 meters of sprint, her rifle up and ready, scanning for any response she might have missed. The station remained silent. The generator hummed on, indifferent to the violence that had just occurred beside it. She cleared the structure in 12 seconds. No additional personnel. No alarms triggered. She dragged the bodies inside and began her work on the communications equipment. The C4 would have been faster, but she needed something more subtle. She needed the station to appear functional while actually being blind. She disconnected critical relay components, rerouted power to create the appearance of normal operation, and ensured that anyone monitoring from the compound would see green lights on equipment that no longer worked. The architect would not know he had lost his eyes until it was too late. She checked her watch. 52 hours until execution. The architect would arrive in approximately 8 hours. She needed to be in position before dawn. Yara slipped out of the station and began her approach toward the compound. Without the surveillance drones watching the southern sector, she could move through terrain that would have been suicide 6 hours earlier. She covered 4 kilometers before the first hint of gray touched the eastern horizon. Her new position was a shallow cave overlooking the compound from the southwest. It was closer than any sane sniper would choose. 1,400 meters to the command post. Well within her effective range, but also well within the range of enemy counter-sniper fire if she was detected. She settled in and began her wait. The sun rose. The compound stirred to life. Patrol rotations continued with mechanical precision. The trap seals remained in their defensive positions, conserving strength for a fight that would come whether they wanted it or not. At 0917, a convoy appeared on the eastern road. 3 vehicles, armored, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who wanted to be seen arriving. The architect was making an entrance. Yara watched through her scope as the convoy entered the compound and stopped before the command post. Fighters gathered to greet their leader with the reverence of men who believed they were witnessing history. The door of the center vehicle opened. The architect stepped out. He was smaller than she expected. Average height, average build, the kind of man who could disappear in any crowd. But there was something in the way he moved, a precision and economy of motion that spoke of absolute control. He surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of an artist examining a completed masterpiece. Yara placed her crosshairs on his chest. 1,400 meters. Wind from the northwest at approximately 8 kilometers per hour. Humidity moderate. She could make this shot. She had made harder shots in training. But if she missed, if he survived, he would know someone was hunting him. He would go to ground. The opportunity would be lost. She needed him closer. She needed certainty. The architect moved toward the command post, surrounded by his senior officers. Yara tracked each face through her scope, memorizing positions and patterns. The communications officer, the tactical coordinator, the head of security. 4 targets, including the architect himself. 4 shots to decapitate the entire operation. But they were never all exposed at once. They rotated in and out of the command post. They used covered walkways between structures. They had survived this long by never presenting easy targets. She was still calculating angles when the radio traffic changed. The enemy communications she had been monitoring suddenly crackled with urgent voices. Something had happened at the relay station. A patrol had found the bodies. The architect was being informed that his surveillance network in the southern sector had been compromised. Yara watched through her scope as the news reached him. She watched his expression shift from satisfaction to calculation to something that looked almost like pleasure. He turned and scanned the mountains to the south with naked eyes, as if he could see her hiding in her shallow cave 1,400 meters away. Then he smiled. He raised a radio to his lips and spoke on an open frequency, the same frequency she was monitoring. His voice was calm and cultured, almost warm. "I know you're out there," he said. "One American, come to die for 460 others. I've been wondering when someone would try. I confess I'm impressed you made it this far. Most would have been stopped at the perimeter. You eliminated my relay station. You moved through my surveillance blind spot. You are skilled, perhaps the most skilled I have encountered." Yara did not move, did not respond. She controlled her breathing and kept her crosshairs steady. "But skill is not enough," the architect continued. "You're one person. I have 200 fighters who will now be searching every meter of these mountains until they find you. You cannot hide forever. You cannot fight us all, and you cannot save your friends. They will die in 48 hours, and you will die knowing you failed." He lowered the radio and turned back toward the command post. Just before he stepped inside, he paused and looked once more toward the southern mountains. "Unless, of course, you are not here to save them. Unless you are here for me specifically. In that case, I invite you to try. I have not had a worthy opponent in some time. It will be refreshing." He disappeared inside. The door closed behind him. Yara released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The enemy knew she was here. 40 fighters were already mobilizing to sweep the mountains. Her element of surprise was gone. Her plan was compromised. She had perhaps 2 hours before they found her position. She pulled out her encrypted radio. "Homestead, this is Wanderer. I have been compromised. Enemy is aware of my presence and deploying search parties. Request status update." Wangi's response came back tight with tension. "Wanderer, Homestead, be advised. Your absence has been noted at Chapman. Admiral Crow has dispatched a team to locate you. Their orders are to arrest you for desertion and return you to base for court-martial." Yara closed her eyes. Hunted from both sides now. The enemy in front of her. Her own people behind her. And 460 SEALs trapped in the middle, counting down the hours until death. She opened her eyes and checked her ammunition. 37 rounds remaining. She was outgunned, outmanned, and out of options. But she was not out of time. Not yet. Yara had 40 minutes before the search parties reached her sector. She used 30 of them to relocate, abandoning the shallow cave for a more defensible position higher on the ridge. The new location offered worse sight lines to the compound, but better escape routes if the enemy closed in. Survival, now, took priority over assassination. She settled into a narrow crevice between 2 boulders and forced herself to eat. Her body needed fuel, even if her stomach rebelled at the thought of food. She chewed mechanically on a protein bar and reviewed her options. Option 1. Evade the search parties, wait for them to lose interest, attempt another approach on the architect. Problem: he would be on high alert now, surrounded by security, never exposing himself. The opportunity she had planned for was gone. Option 2. Fight her way through the search parties, attempt a direct assault on the command post. Problem: she had 37 rounds and 2 grenades. The math did not work. Option 3. Retreat to Chapman, accept arrest, hope that someone else would find a way to save Foxtrot. Problem: no one else was coming. Crow had made that clear. Surrender meant condemning 460 men to death. None of the options were acceptable, which meant she needed a 4th option. She pulled out the encrypted radio and stared at it for a long moment. Mwangi had risked everything to help her. He had fed false intelligence to the arrest team. He had maintained her communication link when doing so was treason. If she contacted him again, she would be putting him in even greater danger. But she needed information. She needed to understand why Crow was so determined to let Foxtrot die. "Homestead, this is Wanderer. I need you to do something for me. Something that could end your career." Mwangi's response was immediate. "My career ended the moment I handed you that radio. What do you need?" "The operation Crow is protecting. The one he says is worth more than 460 lives. I need to know what it is. I need to know why he is willing to sacrifice an entire battalion." Silence on the channel. "Then, that information is classified above my access level. Getting it would require accessing systems I am not authorized to touch." "I know." Yara paused. "I would not ask if there was another way." More silence. She could hear Mwangi breathing on the other end, measuring the weight of what she was asking against the weight of what they had already done. "Give me 20 minutes, he said finally. "And Yara, whatever I find, it will not change the math. You are still 1 person against 200. Maybe, but I need to know if the math was ever real in the first place." She ended the transmission and turned her attention back to the valley below. The search parties were spreading out in a grid pattern, methodical and thorough. The architect's training was evident in every movement. These men did not rush. They did not make mistakes. They would find her eventually unless she gave them a reason to look somewhere else. An idea began to form. Dangerous, perhaps suicidal, but possible. Mwangi's voice crackled through the radio 18 minutes later. "Wanderer, Homestead. I found it. You were right. The math was never real. Tell me, the operation Crow is protecting is called Meridian. It was supposed to be a major intelligence coup, a network of informants embedded in enemy command structures across 3 provinces. Crow has been running it personally for 2 years. It was going to be his legacy, his ticket to a 3rd star. The network was compromised 6 months ago. Every informant was identified and eliminated. Meridian is dead, has been dead for months. But Crow never reported the failure. He has been submitting false intelligence reports, fabricating sources, building a fiction that the operation is still producing results. Yara felt cold despite the Afghan sun. He is protecting a lie. He is protecting his career. If Meridian's failure becomes public, his falsified reports become evidence of fraud, dereliction of duty, possibly treason. He would face court-martial at minimum, more likely prison. The man has been covering up his own incompetence while claiming to protect national security. And Foxtrot. Foxtrot was deployed based on Meridian intelligence. The high-value target they were sent to capture does not exist. The entire operation was built on Crow's lies. If Foxtrot is rescued, if any of those men are debriefed, the truth comes out. Crow needs them to die, not for national security, not for the greater good. He needs them to die so that dead men cannot testify against him. Yara closed her eyes. 460 men, sacrificed not for country or duty or strategic necessity, sacrificed to protect the career of a man who had already failed them. Can you prove this? I have copied the relevant files, encrypted and hidden in 3 separate locations. If something happens to me, the information will be released automatically. Good. Yara opened her eyes. New plan. I am not going to kill the architect. I'm going to let him kill Crow's secret. I do not understand. The architect wants attention. He wants the world to watch his execution. He wants maximum propaganda value. What if the world sees something else instead? What if, in the middle of his broadcast, the truth about Meridian comes out? What if every journalist covering this story suddenly receives evidence that an American admiral sacrificed his own men to cover up his crimes? Mwangi was silent for a moment. That would be chaos. That would be pressure. Every military family in America demanding answers. Congressional hearings. Media firestorm. Crow would not be able to suppress a rescue operation when the entire country is watching and asking why those men were abandoned in the first place. It could work, but you would need to survive long enough to coordinate the release. And you would need someone to distribute the information at exactly the right moment. I need Master Chief done, Yara said. She told me she got her second chance because the families of the people she saved talked to reporters. Time to see if she remembers how that worked. She ended the transmission and began preparing to move. The search parties were getting closer. She had perhaps 30 minutes before her position was compromised. But for the first time since watching Foxtrot die on that drone feed, Yara felt something that might have been hope. She was not just fighting the architect anymore. She was fighting a war on 2 fronts. And she had just found a weapon that could win on both. Yara moved through the mountains like a ghost. She had spent 16 years learning how to disappear, how to become part of the landscape, how to exist in the spaces between enemy awareness. Now those skills were all that stood between her and capture. The search parties swept the ridgeline she had abandoned 12 minutes after she left it. She watched from a kilometer away as they found her previous position, as they called in the discovery, as the architect's voice came over the radio congratulating them on locating her trail. He sounded pleased, excited even. The hunt was giving him something he had been missing. Let him enjoy it. Every minute he spent hunting her was a minute he was not preparing his execution broadcast. Every fighter he deployed to search the mountains was a fighter not guarding the compound. She was becoming exactly what she needed to be, a distraction. She keyed her radio to the frequency Dunn had given her with the tracking beacon. Master Chief, this is Chief Okonkwo. I need to speak with you on a matter of operational significance. The response came faster than expected. Chief, I was wondering when you would call. I have been monitoring some very interesting communications traffic. Seems like you have made quite an impression on our friends in the valley. I need your help. What I'm about to tell you could end your career. It could end both of us in prison. But it could also save 460 lives. A pause. Then Dunn's voice returned, lower and harder. Tell me. Yara explained everything. Meridian. Crow's falsified reports. The truth about why Foxtrot had been abandoned. She explained her plan to release the information during the architect's broadcast to create a media firestorm that would force action. She explained what she needed Dunn to do. When she finished, Dunn was quiet for a long time. Yara could hear the weight of the decision in that silence. This was not like stealing a helicopter. This was exposing a rear admiral. This was burning down the chain of command that had defined both their lives. You know what happens if this fails? Dunn said finally. We do not just lose our careers. We lose everything. We become the villains. The traitors who undermined national security for personal vendettas. I know. And you know that even if it works, even if we save those men and expose Crow, there will be people who never forgive us. People who believe we should have followed orders no matter what those orders cost. I know that too. Another silence. Then, my contact at Reuters still owes me a favor from Kandahar. I know people at 3 other major outlets who would kill for a story like this. When do you need the information released? The execution broadcast is scheduled for 44 hours from now. I need the story to break exactly when the cameras go live. Maximum impact. Maximum pressure. That is a tight window. I will need everything Mwangi collected. And I will need to move fast before Crow realizes what is happening. Mwangi will send you the files. And Master Chief, thank you. Do not thank me yet. Dunn's voice carried something that might have been dark humor. We are about to commit career suicide together. Save the gratitude for after we see if it was worth it. The channel went silent. Yara allowed herself a moment to feel the weight of what she had just set in motion. There was no going back now. The information would spread. The story would break. And whatever happened in the next 44 hours would determine whether she was remembered as a hero or a traitor. She pushed the thought aside and focused on immediate survival. The search parties had found her trail. They would be tracking her now, following the signs she could not completely hide. She needed to stay ahead of them while also staying close enough to the compound to execute the final phase of her plan. Because the media firestorm would create pressure, but pressure alone would not save Foxtrot. Someone still needed to create an opportunity for rescue. Someone still needed to put the architect on the defensive. Someone still needed to buy time for help to arrive. That someone was her. She spent the next 6 hours playing a deadly game of cat and mouse through the Afghan mountains. She left false trails that led search parties in wrong directions. She doubled back through terrain so difficult that her pursuers assumed no one would attempt it. She used every trick she had learned in 16 years of operating in hostile territory. By nightfall, she had worked her way around to the eastern approach of the compound. The search parties were concentrated in the south and west now, following the web of deception she had woven. The eastern sector was lightly guarded, exactly as she had hoped. She found a position overlooking the compound from a new angle. Through her scope, she could see the execution platform that had been constructed in the central courtyard. It was a stage, really, designed for cameras, designed for maximum visual impact. The architect was not just planning a massacre. He was planning a production. The seals of Foxtrot were visible in their defensive positions. 44 hours of siege had taken their toll. She could see exhaustion in their movements, desperation in their postures. But they were still fighting, still holding, still waiting for a rescue that their own command had decided they did not deserve. Yara settled into her new position and began planning her next move. She needed to create chaos at exactly the right moment. She needed to give Foxtrot a chance to break out when the pressure from the media story hit. She needed to be ready to act the instant the world started watching. She pulled out her father's dog tags and held them in her palm. The metal was warm for being pressed against her chest. She traced the letters of his name with her thumb, feeling the grooves worn smooth by 22 years of carrying. I understand now, she whispered to the darkness. You did not choose wrong. You just did not have another choice. I do. She tucked the tags back in her vest and raised her scope to her eye. 36 hours until the broadcast. 36 hours to prepare for the moment when everything would change. In the compound below, Lieutenant Commander Vance was making his rounds again, checking on his men, maintaining hope, keeping 460 souls alive through sheer force of will. Hold on, Yara thought. I'm coming. Just hold on a little longer. She did not sleep that night. She watched. She waited. She prepared for war. The sun rose on day 3, and with it came the final preparations for slaughter. Yara watched through her scope as the architect's men transformed the compound into a theater of death. Camera crews arrived in unmarked vehicles. Lighting rigs were positioned around the execution platform. Technical teams ran cables and tested equipment with the efficiency of professionals who had done this before. The broadcast would reach millions. The architect wanted every detail perfect. 24 hours remained. She had not moved from her position in 18 hours. Her muscles ached. Her eyes burned from constant vigilance. But she could not afford rest. Not now. Not when every minute brought them closer to the moment when everything would either work or collapse entirely. Her radio crackled. Homestead to Wanderer. Go ahead, Homestead. Mwangi's voice was tight with controlled urgency. The arrest team found your vehicle. They know you are in the operational area. Crow has escalated the search. He is diverting resources from other operations to find you. Yara, he knows something is wrong. He is scared. Good. Scared men make mistakes. What about the information package? Delivered to Master Chief Dunn. She confirms receipt and distribution readiness. The story breaks in 23 hours, synchronized with the broadcast start time. Every major outlet will receive the files simultaneously. And Chapman. What is the mood there? Confused. Word is spreading that something is happening with Foxtrot, but no one knows what. Crow has locked down communications. He is trying to control the narrative before he even knows what the narrative is. Yara processed this information. Crow's paranoia was both an advantage and a danger. A paranoid man might make mistakes. A paranoid man might also do something desperate. What about the rescue assets? She asked. If pressure comes down from above, how quickly could Chapman mount an operation? Mwangi paused. Quick Reaction Force is on standby. Has been since Foxtrot went dark. Crow has been blocking deployment authorization, but the assets are ready. Birds could be in the air within 30 minutes of a green light. Then all we need is the green light. All we need is for the entire chain of command above Crow to decide that rescuing those men is more important than protecting one admiral's career. Mwangi's voice carried the weight of hard experience. That is not a small thing, Yara. These people protect each other. They close ranks. Not when the cameras are watching. Not when the families are screaming. Not when the evidence is undeniable. I hope you're right. Because if you are wrong, those men die on live television, and you die in these mountains, and I die in a cell at Leavenworth. We are all in now. No way back. I know. Yara took a breath. Thank you, Tobias, for everything. Mwangi was quiet for a moment. Then, your father will be proud of you. I hope you know that. The channel went silent before she could respond. She spent the next hours studying the compound, memorizing every detail that might matter when the moment came. Guard positions, patrol timing, the location of heavy weapons, the routes that enemy fighters would use if they needed to respond to a threat. She built a mental map so complete that she could navigate the battlefield with her eyes closed. The execution platform dominated the central courtyard. It was elevated, visible from every angle, designed to ensure that the cameras captured everything. The architect would want his audience to see the faces of the men he killed. He would want them to see the fear, the despair, the moment when hope finally died. But Yara saw something else. She saw a stage that required its performers to be exposed. She saw sight lines that worked both ways. She saw a production so focused on visual impact that it sacrificed tactical security. The architect wanted the world to watch. He had built his theater for maximum visibility. He had not considered that visibility made him vulnerable too. She began calculating distances. From her current position to the execution platform, 1,600 meters. Too far for a guaranteed kill shot on a moving target. She needed to get closer. She needed to be inside the perimeter when the broadcast began. That meant moving through enemy territory in daylight. That meant risking detection at the worst possible moment. That meant trusting that the architect's arrogance would blind him to the threat she represented. She studied the eastern approach again. The guards there were relaxed. The search parties had concentrated elsewhere, convinced that she was hiding in the southern mountains where they had found her trail. The eastern sector was considered secure, safe, boring. She could reach the outer wall in 20 minutes if she moved fast. She could find a position inside the perimeter that would give her a clean shot at the platform. She could be ready when the cameras went live and the story broke and the world started paying attention. But once she was inside, there was no extraction, no escape route, no backup plan. She would be one person surrounded by 200 enemy fighters with no way out except through them. Yara thought about her father again. He had followed orders because he believed the system would protect him. He had trusted his commanders to make the right call. He had been wrong, and that mistake had cost him everything. She was not following orders. She was defying them. She was betting her life that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the safe thing. She was betting that 460 families deserve to have their sons and daughters come home. She checked her ammunition one final time. 34 rounds for the SR-25. 58 rounds for her sidearm. 2 fragmentation grenades. 1 block of C4 she had been saving for the right moment. It was not enough. It would have to be enough. She waited until the sun reached its highest point, when shadows were shortest and the guard were most likely to be drowsy from the heat. Then she began her final approach. There was no going back now. In 20 hours, either the world would change, or she would die trying to change it. She moved toward the compound, toward the enemy, toward whatever waited on the other side of this choice. Her father's dog tags pressed against her chest with every step. A reminder, a promise, a prayer. The outer wall was older than the war. Stone blocks fitted together by hands that had turned to dust centuries ago, now crumbling in places where time and violence had taken their toll. Yara found a gap where mortar had failed and squeezed through, holding her breath as loose stones shifted beneath her weight. She was inside the compound. 200 enemy fighters surrounded her, and she had 16 hours until the broadcast began. She moved through the shadows of abandoned structures, working her way toward the center of the compound where the execution platform waited. Every step was calculated. Every breath was controlled. She had become something less than human and something more. A weapon with a heartbeat. A ghost with a purpose. The first guard appeared without warning. He stepped around a corner 3 meters ahead of her, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder, his attention focused on the cigarette he was trying to light. He never saw her. She closed the distance in 2 silent steps, wrapped her arm around his throat, and squeezed until his body went limp. She dragged him into a collapsed doorway and continued moving. 2 more guards fell the same way over the next hour. Silent, efficient, necessary, each body hidden where it would not be discovered until long after it mattered. She found her position in the skeletal remains of a watchtower overlooking the central courtyard. The structure had partially collapsed, leaving a tangle of wood and stone that provided perfect concealment. Through gaps in the debris, she had an unobstructed view of the execution platform. Range to target, 412 meters. Wind negligible. No obstacles between her muzzle and where the architect would stand. Now she waited. The hours crawled past. The sun traced its arc across the sky and began its descent toward the western mountains. Activity in the compound increased as the broadcast time approached. Technicians made final adjustments to cameras and lighting. Fighters took positions around the courtyard, forming a perimeter of armed witnesses. The stage was being set. At 1700 hours, they brought out the first group of SEALs. Yara watched through her scope as 50 American servicemen were marched from the tunnel network toward the platform. They were bound at the wrists, stripped of their gear, but they walked with their heads high. They walked like warriors. Even now, even facing death, they refused to give their captors the satisfaction of seeing them break. She searched the faces until she found Vance. He was near the front of the group, his jaw set, his eyes scanning the compound as if still looking for a way out, as if still believing rescue might come. "I am here," Yara thought. "I am right here. Just hold on." The SEALs were positioned on the platform in rows, forced to their knees, arranged for maximum visual impact. More groups followed. 50 at a time, they were brought from the tunnels and added to the display. The process took nearly 2 hours. By the time it was complete, 460 Americans knelt on that platform, waiting to die in front of the world. The architect appeared as darkness fell. He emerged from the command post wearing clean clothes and a calm expression, walking toward the platform with the unhurried confidence of a man who had already won. His senior officers flanked him. Camera operators tracked his movement. Lights blazed to life, illuminating the platform in harsh white brilliance. He climbed the steps to the stage and turned to face the cameras. When he spoke, his voice carried the same cultured tone Yara remembered from his broadcast 3 days ago. In 12 minutes, the world will be watching. In 12 minutes, the American people will see what happens to those who invade our lands and murder our families. In 12 minutes, justice will be delivered. Yara settled her crosshairs on his chest. 412 meters. She could make this shot in her sleep. But killing him now would not stop the execution. His men would carry out his orders whether he was alive or dead. She needed to wait for the broadcast. She needed the world to be watching when the truth came out. Her radio vibrated against her chest. She pressed the earpiece deeper and listened. Wander, this is Homestead. Story is breaking now. Every major network just received the Meridian files. It is happening. Yara, check her watch. The broadcast was supposed to start in 10 minutes. The story was breaking early. That meant Dunn had pushed the timeline forward. That meant something had changed. What happened? She whispered. Crow figured it out. He tried to stop the release. Dunn had to move fast. The story is out, but it is messy. Some outlets are running it. Others are still verifying. We do not have the unified pressure we planned for. In the courtyard below, the architect raised his hand. The cameras focused on him. Red lights blinked to life, indicating live transmission. We are out of time, Yara said. She watched the architect begin his speech for the global audience. She watched the SEALs kneeling behind him, 460 men who had been written off by their own command. She watched the fighters surrounding the platform, weapons ready, waiting for the order to begin the killing. The story was breaking. Pressure was building. But it was not enough. Not yet. Not fast enough to stop what was about to happen. She needed to buy time. She needed to create chaos. She needed to give the world a reason to keep watching long enough for the pressure to reach critical mass. Yara shifted her aim from the architect to the bank of lights illuminating the platform. For shots. For lights. Darkness would fall on the execution stage, and the broadcast would become chaos instead of propaganda. It would also reveal her position to 200 enemy fighters. She took a breath, held it, and began to shoot. The first light exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. The second followed a half-second later. The third, the fourth. The execution platform plunged into darkness as the carefully designed broadcast descended into chaos. Yara was already moving before the last light died. She had revealed her position with those shots. Staying meant death. She dropped from the watchtower and sprinted through the shadows as shouts erupted across the compound. The architect's voice cut through the confusion, calm and commanding. Do not panic. Find the shooter. Restore the lights. We continue as planned. But the cameras were still rolling. The world was still watching. And instead of a choreographed execution, they were seeing chaos. They were seeing an enemy commander who had lost control of his own production. Yara reached a new position behind a crumbling wall 50 meters from the platform. Through the darkness, she could see fighters scrambling to respond. Some were searching for her. Others were trying to restore the lighting. None of them knew where to look. She raised her rifle and found the architect's communications officer. The man was shouting into a radio, trying to coordinate the response. She squeezed the trigger. He dropped. The tactical coordinator was next, standing near the platform steps, issuing orders. Another shot. Another body. Panic began to spread. The architect's disciplined force was fracturing under pressure they had never anticipated. They had planned for a siege. They had planned for a rescue attempt. They had not planned for a single ghost inside their perimeter, killing their leaders one by one. Yara shifted position again as bullets tore through the wall she had been using for cover. They were triangulating her location now. She had minutes at most before they pinned her down. Her radio crackled. Wanderer, Homestead. The story is everywhere. Every network is running it. Meridian is the lead on every broadcast. Crow has been relieved of command pending investigation. Acting commander is General Westbrook, and the rescue authorization. Westbrook is reviewing now. The pressure is immense. Families are calling congressional offices. Senators are calling the Pentagon. It is working, Yara. It is actually working. She ducked as another burst of gunfire shattered stone above her head. Tell them to hurry. I cannot hold much longer. On the platform, something unexpected was happening. The SEALs, still bound and kneeling, had seen the chaos. They had heard the shots. They knew someone was fighting for them, and they were beginning to fight back. Vance moved first. He threw himself sideways into the guard nearest him, knocking the man off balance. Other SEALs followed his lead, using their bodies as weapons despite their restraints. The guards on the platform were suddenly fighting 460 desperate men who had nothing left to lose. Yara saw her opportunity. She sprinted toward the platform, firing at any enemy fighter who turned in her direction. She was exposed now, completely visible, but the chaos was so complete that no one could coordinate a response. She reached the platform steps and vaulted onto the stage. A fighter lunged at her with a knife. She sidestepped, caught his arm, broke at the elbow, and put him down with a shot from her sidearm. Another came at her from the right. 2 shots to center mass. He fell. Vance had wrestled a knife away from a guard and was cutting the bonds of the men nearest him. He looked up as Yara reached his position, and for a moment, recognition and disbelief warred on his face. "Chief Okonkwo," he said, "what the hell are you doing here?" "Disobeying orders, sir." She pulled her own knife and began cutting restraints. Seemed like the right call. Freed SEALs grabbed weapons from fallen guards and began forming a defensive perimeter around the platform. They were still outnumbered, still surrounded, but they were no longer helpless. They were fighting. The architect's voice boomed across the compound, amplified by speakers that still functioned. Enough. His tone had lost its cultured calm. Kill them all. Kill them now. Forget the cameras. End this. Yara saw him standing near the command post, surrounded by his remaining officers, directing the counterattack. She raised her rifle and found him in her scope. 600 meters. Wind picking up from the east. Difficult shot. Not impossible. She exhaled slowly and began to squeeze the trigger. A bullet struck her left shoulder before she could complete the shot. The impact spun her sideways, her rifle flying from her grip. She hit the platform hard, pain exploding through her body, blood already soaking her uniform. Through blurring vision, she saw the fighter who had shot her advancing, weapon raised for the finishing blow. She reached for her sidearm with her right hand, knowing she would be too slow, knowing this was how it ended. The fighter's head snapped back as a bullet took him between the eyes. He collapsed in a heap. Vance stood over her, holding a captured rifle, smoke still rising from the barrel. He reached down and pulled at her feet. "You came alone," he said. "One person against all of this." She gritted her teeth against the pain in her shoulder. Someone had to. The sound reached them before the sight did. A deep rhythmic thudding that grew louder with each passing second. Rotors. Helicopters. Multiple aircraft approaching from the east. Yara looked up and saw them. Black shapes against the darkening sky, moving fast, running lights blazing. American helicopters. Rescue birds. Mwangi's voice exploded through her radio. "Wanderer, Homestead. General Westbrook has authorized full rescue operation. QRF is inbound. I repeat, help is on the way." The SEALs around her began to cheer. 460 voices rising in desperate hope as the helicopters grew closer. The sound of salvation after 3 days of hell. Yara swayed on her feet, blood loss making the world spin. But she stayed upright. She had to see this through. She had to know it was real. The first helicopter swept over the compound, door gunners laying down suppressive fire that sent enemy fighters scrambling for cover. More aircraft followed, disgorging teams of fresh operators who hit the ground shooting. The rescue had begun. The compound had become a war zone. Helicopter gunships circled overhead, their weapons tearing through enemy positions with devastating precision. Ground teams advanced through the chaos, pushing the enemy back building by building. The tide had turned completely in a matter of minutes. Yara pressed her hand against her wounded shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing bone and major arteries, but she was losing blood faster than she could afford. Her vision kept tunneling at the edges, threatening to collapse into darkness. Vance appeared beside her with a medical kit scavenged from a fallen enemy fighter. "Hold still," he said, his hands already working to pack the wound. "This is going to hurt." "It already hurts," she said through gritted teeth. "Do it." He worked quickly and efficiently, the way all SEALs were trained to work under fire. Within 2 minutes, he had the wound packed and bandaged, not perfect but enough to keep her alive. "You need a medevac," he said. "You have done enough. Let's finish this." Yara shook her head. "The architect is still out there. I saw him near the command post. If he escapes, he rebuilds. He does this again somewhere else." Vance studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Together, then. Like Mosul." "Like Mosul," she agreed. They moved through the compound as a team, covering each other, communicating with the wordless efficiency of operators who had trained for years to fight as one. Around them, the battle raged. Enemy fighters were being systematically overwhelmed, but pockets of resistance remained. The architect's men were fanatics. They would fight to the last. The command post was a squat concrete structure at the northern edge of the compound. It had been built to withstand bombardment, with reinforced walls and narrow firing ports. As Yara and Vance approached, they could see fighters taking defensive positions around it. The architect was inside. He was making his last stand. Yara counted 8 fighters guarding the entrance. She had 11 rounds left in her sidearm. Vance had a captured rifle with an unknown number of rounds. The math was not good. She reached in her vest and pulled out the block of C4 she had been carrying since Chapman. She had saved it for exactly this moment. "Can you give me 30 seconds of covering fire?" she asked. Vance looked at the C4, then at the command post, then back at her. "What are you going to do?" "Something stupid." She managed a weak smile. "Seems to be my specialty today." Vance positioned himself behind a pile of rubble with clear sight lines to the enemy positions. "On your signal," he said. Yara took a breath, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, ignoring the weakness in her legs, ignoring everything except the target ahead. Then she moved. Vance opened fire, his shots precise and controlled, forcing the enemy fighters to take cover. Yara sprinted across the open ground, her legs burning, her lungs screaming, her wounded shoulder sending lightning bolts of agony through her body with every step. She reached the wall of the command post and pressed herself against it, breathing hard. The C4 was already primed. She placed it against the reinforced door and set the timer for 10 seconds. Then she ran. The explosion blew the door inward with enough force to kill 2 fighters standing behind it. Yara was through the smoking gap before the debris settled, her sidearm up and firing. 1 fighter down. 2. 3. She moved through the structure like a force of nature, clearing rooms with brutal efficiency. She found the architect in the back room, alone, standing behind a desk covered in maps and communications equipment. He held a pistol in his hand, but he had not raised it. He was watching her with an expression that might have been admiration. "The woman from the mountains," he said. "You are more impressive than I imagined." Yara kept her weapon trained on his chest. "Put down the gun." He smiled. "You know I will not do that. Men like me do not surrender. We do not face trials in cages. We choose our own endings." "You do not have to die here," Yara said. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. "You have information. Intelligence that could save lives on both sides. Surrender, and you might actually do some good for once." The architect laughed softly. "Good. Such a small word for such a complicated concept. I have done what I believed was right. You have done the same. We are not so different, you and I. We both defy the orders of those above us when we believe those orders are wrong. I defied orders to save lives. You built a machine to end them. And yet here we stand, both of us willing to die for our beliefs." He raised his pistol slowly, not pointing it at her, but not surrendering it either. "Tell me, Chief, Okonkwo. Yes, I know your name. I have been listening to your communications. Was it worth it? Throwing away your career, risking everything, for men you do not even know. Yara thought about Vance, about the 460 SEALs being evacuated even now, about her father, who had followed orders and watched people die, about the choice she had made and the price she had paid. Yes, she said, it was worth it. Then we understand each other. The architect raised his pistol toward his own head. Yara moved without thinking. Her shot took him in the hand, shattering the pistol and sending it flying across the room. He screamed and collapsed, clutching his ruined fingers. She stood over him, her weapon still raised. You do not get to choose your ending, she said. You face justice. You answer for what you have done. That is how this works. Vance appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, his rifle sweeping the room for additional threats. Clear, Yara said. It is over. She looked down at the architect, writhing in pain on the floor of his command post. The man who had planned the deaths of 460 Americans. The man who had built a masterpiece of murder, brought down by one woman who refused to follow orders. It is over, she said again, and this time she believed it. The helicopter lifted off as dawn broke over the mountains. Yara sat strapped to a stretcher, medics working on her shoulder, the rhythmic thump of rotors drowning out everything except her own thoughts. Through the open door, she watched the compound shrink below her. Smoke still rose from a dozen fires. Bodies still littered the ground. But the SEALs of Battalion Foxtrot were gone, evacuated to safety, alive, because she had refused to let them die. 460 rescued. 11 lost in the original ambush and the battle that followed. 89 wounded, some critically. The numbers would be analyzed and debated for years. But for now, the only number that mattered was the one Yara kept repeating in her mind. 460 families who would see their loved ones again. She closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her. She woke in a hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Machines beeped steadily beside her. Her shoulder was wrapped in fresh bandages, the pain dulled to a distant throb by whatever medications dripped through her floor. Sunlight streamed through a window, warm and gentle, impossibly peaceful after everything she had survived. Mwangi sat in a chair beside her bed, reading a newspaper. He looked up when she stirred and set the paper aside with a small smile. "Welcome back," he said. "You've been out for 36 hours. The doctors say you will make a full recovery. Shoulder will need physical therapy, but you will shoot again." Yara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The room spun. Mwangi placed a gentle hand on her good shoulder and eased her back down. Slowly, he said, "You lost a lot of blood. Your body needs time." She lay back and stared at the ceiling. What happened? After, Mwangi picked up the newspaper and held it where she could see the headline. Admiral arrested in cover-up scandal. Below it, a smaller headline read, Lone SEAL Sniper saves 460 IN daring rescue. Crow was taken into custody 2 hours after the rescue operation launched, Mwangi said. The evidence was overwhelming. Falsified intelligence reports, fraudulent mission authorizations, conspiracy to cover up the deaths of American service members. He is facing court-martial on 17 separate charges. His career is over. His freedom is likely over too. And the architect, in custody, being transferred to a secure facility for interrogation. The intelligence community is very interested in what he knows. He will spend the rest of his life in a cell, answering questions. Mwangi paused. You gave him exactly what he did not want. A slow ending instead of a dramatic one. Yara thought about that moment in the command post. The gun rising toward his head. Her shot shattering his hand. She had acted on instinct, but the instinct had been right. Death would have been an escape. Justice was a sentence. What about me? She asked. Am I facing charges? Mwangi's expression shifted to something complicated. Pride and concern mixed together. That is less clear. Technically, you disobeyed direct orders, went AWOL, and conducted an unauthorized military operation in a foreign country. Those are serious offenses. But you also saved 460 American lives, exposed a corrupt admiral, and captured one of the most wanted terrorists in the region. General Westbrook has recommended a full review of the circumstances. Master Chief Dunn has submitted testimony on your behalf. And approximately 460 SEAL families have been calling their representatives, demanding you receive a medal instead of a cell. Yara almost laughed, but it hurt too much. So I am a hero or a criminal, depending on who you ask. You're both, Mwangi said. That is how it works when you break the rules. The outcome determines the label. He leaned forward. For what it is worth, I think the outcome speaks for itself. You did what the rest of us were too afraid to do. You chose people over protocol. Your father would understand that choice better than anyone. The mention of her father brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them back and nodded. Over the following weeks, Yara recovered. Physical therapy restored mobility to her shoulder. Debriefings extracted every detail of her 3 days in the mountains. Investigators reviewed her actions and weighed them against the regulations she had violated. The verdict came on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the rescue. Yara stood in her dress uniform before a panel of senior officers, her shoulders still stiff but functional, her record laid bare for judgment. General Westbrook read the decision himself. Chief Petty Officer Yara Okonkwo, after careful review of the evidence and circumstances surrounding the events of October 17th through 20th, this panel finds that your actions, while technically in violation of military regulations, were undertaken in good faith to preserve the lives of American service members who had been wrongfully abandoned by their chain of command. Furthermore, your actions directly resulted in the exposure of criminal conduct at the highest levels and the rescue of 460 personnel who would otherwise have been killed. He paused and looked at her directly. Therefore, all charges against you are dismissed. Additionally, this panel recommends you for the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. The room erupted. Yara stood perfectly still, unable to process what she was hearing. Behind her, she could hear Dunn's voice raised in celebration. Somewhere in the gallery, Mwangi was applauding. Vance found her afterward, outside the hearing room, standing in the sunshine with her medal citation in her hand. He looked healthier than the last time she had seen him. Rested. Whole. You know, he said, when you pulled me out of that burning vehicle in Mosul, I told you I owed you one. Yara shook her head. You saved my life on that platform. We are even. We will never be even. He smiled. But that is okay. That is what family does. We keep saving each other. She thought about her father, about the choice he made and the choice she made, about protocol and duty and the space between what was legal and what was right. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed courage when the rules said to stand out. Yara looked at the medal citation one more time, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She had broken every rule that had defined her career. She had risked everything she had built over 16 years. She had become exactly what she had always feared becoming, someone who defied orders when it mattered most. And she would do it again, every single time. She walked toward the parking lot where Mwangi and Dunn were waiting. Behind her, the sun climbed higher into a clear blue sky. Ahead of her, a future she had never imagined stretched out like an open road. 460 families were whole today because one woman decided that some rules were meant to be broken. That was enough. That would always be enough.